The fluorescent kitchen light buzzed overhead as Scarlett Winters folded her last clean blouse, the navy one with pearl buttons she saved for funerals and doctor visits. Her arthritic fingers trembled against the worn fabric smoothing wrinkles that seemed to mirror the lines etched deep into her 70-year-old face. The house around her echoed with the hollow silence of abandonment, punctuated only by the persistent drip of a faucet she couldn't afford to fix. Through the window, Chicago's winter wind rattled the glass, and she pulled her threadbare cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The phone's shrill ring cut through the quiet like a blade. Scarlett's heart lurched. Calls at this hour usually meant bad news, and at her age there was plenty to fear. She shuffled to the avocado green rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall, its cord stretched and frayed from decades of use. "Mrs. Winters," the voice was crisp, professional, devoid of warmth. "This is Janet Mills from Cook County Municipal Court. You've been summoned to appear as a witness tomorrow morning." Scarlett's grip tightened on the receiver. "A witness I don't understand." "Regarding a public disturbance case, the defendant claims you were his teacher." Papers rustled in the background. "A homeless man named Robert Martinez. Do you know him?" The name struck her like lightning, flooding her mind with memories of small hands clutching broken pencils and eyes that held too much sadness for a child. But Robert, little Bobby, had been 10 years old the last time she'd seen him. That was over 3 decades ago, before her husband left, before her children scattered across the country, before the school district forced her into early retirement. Scarlett spent the night in her recliner, unable to face the empty bedroom where Thomas once slept beside her. The house creaked and settled around her, and she found herself remembering the classroom that had been her sanctuary for 37 years. Room 205 at Lincoln Elementary, where she'd taught 5th grade with a passion that sustained her through every challenge. She'd loved those children, the shy ones, the loud ones, the forgotten ones, especially the forgotten ones. The next morning, Scarlett dressed in her good blouse and the black skirt she'd worn to her mother's funeral. She took the bus downtown, watching the city blur past the window as anxiety twisted in her stomach. The courthouse loomed before her, all granite and authority, making her feel smaller than she already was. Inside the courtroom smelled of old wood and stale coffee. Scarlett sat on the hard bench where they'd placed her, conscious of how out of place she looked among the lawyers in their sharp suits and the court officials with their practiced expressions. Her hands shook as she waited, wondering what had become of the sweet boy she remembered. When they brought him in, Scarlett's breath caught in her throat. The man before her was gaunt, his face weathered by years of hardship. His clothes were dirty, his hair unkempt, but his eyes, those same dark eyes that had once looked at her with such trust, remained unchanged. For a moment, 30 years fell away, and she saw 10-year-old Bobby Martinez sitting in the back row of her classroom, too proud to admit he was hungry. Judge Patricia Coleman, a stern woman in her 50s, called the court to order. Scarlett listened as the charges were read: public intoxication, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest. The prosecution painted Robert as a repeat offender, a nuisance to society. His public defender, overwhelmed and underprepared, offered little in his defense. "The state calls Scarlett Winters to the stand," the prosecutor announced. Scarlett rose, on unsteady legs, her hand trembling as she placed it on the Bible to swear her oath. The courtroom seemed to spin around her, all eyes focused on this elderly woman who looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. "Mrs. Winters," the prosecutor began, his voice patronizing, "do you recognize the defendant?" Scarlett looked at Robert, who sat hunched at the defense table. When their eyes met, she saw a flicker of the boy she'd once known, vulnerable, hopeful, desperately wanting to be seen. "Yes," she whispered, then cleared her throat and spoke louder. "Yes, I do." "And how do you know him?" "He was my student. 3rd grade, then 4th, then 5th. I had him for 3 years at Lincoln Elementary." The words came easier now, memories flooding back. "His name is Robert Martinez, but we called him Bobby." The prosecutor smiled dismissively. "And what was he like as a student?" Scarlett felt something stir within her, a protective instinct she hadn't felt in years. "He was brilliant," she said firmly. "One of the brightest children I ever taught. He could solve math problems in his head that other kids needed paper for. He wrote stories that made me cry. What would they discover about Bobby's past that might change everything? Robert's attorney stood up, surprising everyone with his next question. Mrs. Winters, can you tell us about Bobby's home life? The prosecutor objected, but Judge Coleman overruled him. I'll allow it. Scarlett's voice grew stronger as she spoke. Bobby came to school hungry most days. His clothes were too small, often dirty. He had bruises. She paused, looking directly at Robert. I kept crackers in my desk drawer. Granola. Suars. I'd leave them out, pretend I'd forgotten them there. Bobby would take them when he thought no one was looking. The courtroom was quiet now, hanging on her every word. He was being hurt at home. I could see it in the way he flinched when adults raised their voices, how he'd hoard food, like he didn't know when he'd eat again. I called social services, but they said they needed more evidence. I tried to get him help, but the system... She shook her head. The system failed him. Scarlett continued, her voice growing emotional. Bobby stopped coming to school in the middle of his 5th grade year, just disappeared. I drove to his house, but they'd moved. I never found out what happened to him. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I've thought about him every year since then. Wondered if he was safe, if he was happy, if I'd done enough. Judge Coleman leaned forward. Mrs. Winters, in your opinion, what kind of child was Bobby Martinez? He was a child who deserved better than what life gave him, Scarlett replied without hesitation. He was kind, gentle, smart. He protected the younger kids on the playground. He shared his lunch on the rare days he had one. He was just good. Despite everything he was going through at home, he had the biggest heart. She looked at Robert again. I can't imagine that has changed. How could the court system truly understand the depth of a teacher's connection to her students? The unexpected happened when Robert's attorney called him to testify in his own defense. Robert stood slowly, his chains clinking, as he made his way to the witness stand. His hands shook as he placed them on the Bible, and his voice was hoarse when he began to speak. Your Honor, he said, looking directly at Judge Coleman, Mrs. Winters saved my life. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but Robert continued. She was the only adult who ever showed me kindness. When I came to school with black eyes, she didn't just ignore it like everyone else. She made sure I had food. She made sure I felt human. Scarlett pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. I ran away when I was 12, Robert continued. My stepfather, he was getting worse. I lived on the streets, in foster homes, in juvenile detention. I've been homeless for 15 years, struggling with addiction, with mental illness. But I never forgot Mrs. Winters. She taught me that I mattered even when everyone else acted like I didn't exist. He turned to look at Scarlett. The night I got arrested, I was having what my doctor calls a psychotic episode. I hadn't eaten in 3 days, hadn't slept in longer. But when the police asked for my name, I thought of her. I thought of how she used to call me Bobby, how she'd smile when she saw me. I told them I knew Mrs. Winters because in that moment I needed to remember that someone had once cared about me. The silence in the courtroom was profound. Judge Coleman wiped her eyes, and even the prosecutor looked moved. Mrs. Winters, Robert said, his voice breaking, you probably don't remember, but the last day I saw you, you gave me a hug. You said I was special, that I was going to do great things. That hug, it's gotten me through some of the darkest moments of my life. Scarlett stood up from the witness stand without permission, her composure completely gone. Bobby, she whispered, then louder. Bobby, I remember everything. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm so sorry the world failed you. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as this elderly teacher and the homeless man she'd taught decades ago looked at each other across the years of pain that separated them. Judge Coleman called for a recess, her own emotions clearly overwhelming her. When court resumed, her voice was gentle but firm. In 25 years on this bench, I've never heard testimony that moved me more. Mr. Martinez, you've clearly struggled with addiction and mental health issues that stem from childhood trauma. Mrs. Winters, your testimony shows us the profound impact teachers can have on their students' lives. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Mr. Martinez, I'm sentencing you to time served and mandatory participation in our drug court program. You'll receive counseling, job training, and housing assistance. This court recognizes that your actions stem from untreated trauma, not criminal intent." The judge turned to Scarlett. "Mrs. Winters, I don't know if you're aware, but our county has a volunteer mentor program for people transitioning out of homelessness. We're always looking for people with your compassion and experience." Scarlett nodded through her tears. "I'd like that very much, Your Honor." As the court session ended, Robert approached Scarlett hesitantly. Up close, she could see the boy she'd once known in his weathered features. "Mrs. Winters," he said softly, "I know I don't have the right to ask, but would you maybe have coffee with me sometime when I get settled in the program?" Scarlett reached out and took his hands in hers, not caring that they were dirty or that people were watching. "Bobby," she said, "I would love nothing more. You call me whenever you're ready and we'll have coffee, and you can tell me all about your life, the good parts and the bad parts, all of it." 3 months later, Scarlett sat in a small cafe on Chicago's North Side, watching Robert, clean, sober, and employed at a local non-profit, tell her about his progress in therapy. His eyes were clearer now, his smile genuine. He'd gained weight, and there was hope in his voice when he talked about the future. "I start community college in the fall," he told her, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Social work. I want to help kids like I was." Scarlett beamed with pride. "You'll be wonderful at it. You understand what those children are going through in a way most people never could." As they talked, Scarlett realized that for the first time in years she felt useful again. The volunteer program had connected her with other people transitioning out of homelessness, and she discovered that her years of teaching had prepared her well for this new role. She had purpose again, and more importantly, she had Bobby back in her life. Walking home that evening, Scarlett's steps were lighter than they'd been in years. Her house was still empty, her phone still silent most days, but she no longer felt invisible. She'd been reminded that the love she'd given as a teacher had mattered, that the kindness she'd shown had rippled forward through time to save a life she'd thought was lost forever. That night, she made tea with cinnamon, Bobby's favorite, and sat in her kitchen reading the letters he'd started writing, her telling her about his progress, his hopes, his gratitude. For the first time in a long while, Scarlett Winters felt truly seen, and more importantly, she remembered who she'd always been, a teacher, a giver of hope, a woman whose love had the power to transform lives. Have you ever felt forgotten by those you've given everything to, only to discover your impact in unexpected ways? Share your experience in the comments below. The simple truth Scarlett learned that day in court was that love, real, unconditional love, never disappears. It travels through time, carried in the hearts of those we've touched, waiting for the perfect moment to remind us of who we truly are. In saving Bobby all those years ago, she had ultimately saved herself, proving that the most profound connections we make in life are never really lost. They're just waiting to be rediscovered. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.